Hi, everyone, and welcome to Nature Connections. Thanks, everyone who's watching this video. In the Nature Connections interview, I talk to people from all paths of life, but who have one thing in common, which is their connection to nature in what they do. And in today's episode, I'm delighted to speak with Fiona McIntyre. Hi, Fiona, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Fiona is an artist. I would say, I don't know exactly how you would say, like nature, landscape, tree artist, and a member of the Arborealists movement. I think I've said that right. And I'm really excited to hear more about the story and the woman behind the beautiful tree paintings and drawings. So it'd be great if you could start by telling us a bit about your story and sort of what brought you to what you do and this connection to nature.
Okay, well, I should start right from the beginning, really. So my grandfather he worked for the Forestry Commission, the Argyll and Bute Forestry Commission on the west coast of Scotland, which is a really beautiful place. And him and my grandmother lived in a tiny cottage on the edge of the forest,
The dream.
which is called Barcaldine Forest. So I was going up there, really every single summer we would go up there and spend all our holidays on the west coast.
Mm.
And one of my very earliest memories, I was trying to look back, and there was one where I was a bit older and I was taken on a walk with my grandfather up the hillside. And I remember being really amazed at how knowledgeable he was. You know, he was pointing out the trees, the names of the trees, mushrooms, and even picking up rocks and talking about the geology, right down to the smallest little plants. And that made a huge sort of impact on me, something I never really forgot. But to go back to the very, very first time that I remember going up there, and I was probably about maybe 4 or 5 years of age. And we drove all the way up there. We arrived in the dead of night. And what I remember is, I think I was probably carried out of the car, I think, or I can't remember, or I climbed out sort of quite sleepy into this blackness. And I just remember it felt like a sort of velvet cape being wrapped around my body because there was no ambient light, no lights, no street lights. It was just nature in the raw. And then the other thing that I became aware of was the smell that was wafting out of the forest, the smell of pine trees. So that was a really powerful memory, and it was quite, I think it awakened something quite primal within me. And that stayed with me all my life. So that was my first encounter, really. And then later on, of course, I would return and I would draw as an art student at Edinburgh College of Art. I used to go up there and stay, and I go into the woods. I spend all day drawing, sketching. But trees hadn't yet become a focal point for me.
Okay.
I suppose then they were peripheral, because I was always interested in landscape, but also the figure. The figure played a big part. But in many respects, that was relevant. We had to do life drawing every day. But in fact, I think it's helped a lot with drawing trees, because I think trees are quite a lot like humans.
Definitely agree with that, yes.
Yeah.
You can find such human curves and movement in trees. Or maybe we can say the opposite. We can find such tree-like shapes in humans. I don't know. But yeah, that is fascinating.
And they're sort of limb-like, aren't they? Some of the branches, you know, you can see sort of knobbly knees and elbows. And
thanks for sharing, this beautiful story of your earliest memories, because it's incredible how, you know, impactful these early memories are on our who we become, really. And actually, there's one thing I also wanted to ask you, which I heard in another interview of you is where you come from. So how did you grow up? From what I understand, you grew up in different countries. And
well, I was born in Nairobi, Kenya, as we called it, but it's I think it's now known as Kenya. Yeah, so I mean, I was there as a baby, so I didn't spend a lot of time there. And then we came back, we moved to Ireland. So I would say my sentient memories really are in Ireland. And again, it was a sort of semi-rural situation.
Yeah, a very natural place.
Yeah, so it was a paradise growing up there, I would say. And I felt very close to nature. And again, I think aromas come into it quite a lot. You know, there's another story of me playing with my brother and my cousins outside, as we always did in those days. And then it started raining. Now, we built a camp and they all ran inside, and I just liked the rain. I loved being outside, and I remember just lying under the camp, which is just blankets over some chairs, and suddenly realizing there are these amazing smells coming out of the ground, because that's what happens when it rains.
Absolutely. Well, we've seen that firsthand in the UK in the last week, appreciating the smells coming from the rain. But it is a wonderful thing, absolutely. And so, how did you sort of channel all these memories, encounters with nature, and take the route of becoming an artist and exploring that in your arts? What kind of drove you to this direction in your life?
I've always drawn and painted. I mean, literally all my life since a child, I was always drawing and painting, spending a lot of time outside, listening to music as well. Weirdly, I listened to classical music until I was a teenager. So I was studying piano, classical piano and flute. So that was important to me. And through listening to music, just to tell you one more memory. So I was listening, I remember I used to sneak into my parents' living room and put the vinyl records on the turntable. That was from the age of about, I'm just trying to remember, 10 or something, I think. And I found this record by Grieg. So I started to listen to Peer Gynt. It was the competition Peer Gynt. Okay. And I didn't know anything about it, but in fact, it was interesting. Just listening to the music, it took me into the forests of Norway. And that brings me to the next bit of the story. So I trained at Edinburgh College of Art. That was a natural step for me because of my Scottish background. But I then ended up moving out to Sweden inadvertently. And I lived there.
What attracted you there, or was it just a?
Well, I met a boy.
Exactly. That's what generally brings us to different places.
Yeah. So he was from Iceland, and we got married in the end and went out there. He was doing his PhD at Lund University. And I eventually got a studio and studied the language. And then 3 years later, I was told about an amazing print workshop. That's a whole other story. But I was very fortunate to win a place. There were 4 people who got in that year, and I was one of them. So that was
experience, I'm sure.
But that was a pivotal part in my art career, I would say, because the man who was running it was called Bertil Lundberg, and he was one of the Swedish surrealists, known as the Imaginists.
Okay.
So he was taking printmaking into a different place, really.
Wow.
So it's all about the subconscious, sort of delving into your subconscious, trusting in your intuitiveness, and being, very interactive with the copper plate, which is what we were mainly using, and treating it as an artwork in its own right, rather than just something that you're, more of a minor sort of craft, which I think it has been seen as in many places.
It's seen as sort of the tool to sketch, right? Before for preparing a painting, or almost used as just a pencil sketch, but a bit more advanced.
Yeah, and also purely as reproduction. So it was a way of disseminating information. Famous paintings, they could suddenly be seen all across Europe and the rest of the world. Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about everything that you do? So do you still do a bit of the printmaking as well as part of
yes,
of your current work? And you also do some paintings. I think one of them is behind you. And
yes. So well, this is in the private gardens of a rather amazing house, actually, called Stanton Park. So I got permission to go in there, and it's got an amazing lake, and it's got a folly on it, which looks like an Indian temple, really. It's very Byron-esque inside. And in fact, I was commissioned to do an enormous painting, which is hanging on the walls in Stanton Park, and a drawing, which can be seen on my website. So that's the boathouse that you can see, surrounded by trees, obviously, and water. So that's another thing that I'm very interested in, that dynamic between trees and water. I've long been fascinated with.
Like the reflections and the vein that...
And the fact that it somehow enhances this concept of abstraction. It's breaking everything up, and it's simplifying color, and it's creating a sort of an echo of the trees, isn't it? Which I find really interesting.
That's that's an interesting way of exploring it, because I explore that, but through the shadows in my work with the glass. And so it's also a way of doubling and looking at the reflections and sort of the other tree. But I love what you're saying about the water, because it also has that mirror-like properties and all these reflections that you're not really sure what's going on. It's quite magical.
Yes, exactly. And I think that my work is heading very much in that sort of semi abstraction. I'm not interested in being very fiddly, very tight, although my drawings can be. My drawings are very much about observation, I would say, but they're also very expressive. So it's interesting, because initially I was taught drawing by a woman. This is the very first year in art school, which was in an English art school called West Surrey College of Art and Design. Well, the woman who taught me was called Khan Holly, who went on to teach at the RCA.
The Royal College of Arts.
Yeah. So she was really teaching, I would say, the Coldstream analytical drawing techniques. And I was somewhat chastised later on as a student in Edinburgh. They were saying it's the English style, you have to get rid of it. And eventually they did manage to sort of beat it out of me, so to speak, and which, in fact, I'm very grateful, because the Scots are very painterly, very painterly, and they love colour, and I think that's all come out in my work over the year.
So how do you paint and draw your trees? How do you get this inspiration? Do you yourself, I guess you're surrounded by nature where you live? Do you go on walks? Do you take photos? How's the process, and from the inspiration to the creation?
Well, yeah, I go on walks. I find trees that I fall in love with. They're not necessarily always the most obvious trees. I quite like unassuming trees. So I spent a whole year drawing in, again, the grounds of another private house. I got permission to go in there, and I liked it because it had amazing lakes and trees. Now, the trees were very unassuming. They were brook alder trees.
Okay.
They're not the most stunningly beautiful trees, but there's something about them that I find really magical, and I quite like that sort of slightly more humble looking tree, I suppose. And but if you look back in history, you find that, I mean, most of these trees have got magical properties. So maybe from a herbalist point of view, but these particular trees if you cut them, it looks like they're bleeding because
wow.
Yeah, they have this
have
orange,
sort of a red sap coming out.
Yeah, exactly, and that was used to dye fabrics.
Oh wow.
So there are a lot of positive things about these trees, and also because they grow their roots into the water, and there's a chemical reaction, so they go really rock hard. And so people were making clogs out of wood, for example, because they're naturally waterproof. So all of that kind of thing, but also the idea that to the ancients, they believed that these trees had the power of prophecy, and so that the human could also somehow take that on, that power of prophecy, if they were in proximity with the brick alder tree, because
where are they? Where are they? Let's gather around them.
But we come to this idea of looking into still water, still dark water. And that's where the idea of scrying, you may have heard of that, I don't know. And then the next step on from that was looking into a crystal ball to read the future. People like John Dee, who was the magus to Elizabeth I, he would scry. So that's looking into a small bowl of dark water, and then you start to see images, and then you can, prophesize things that are going to happen. So this is all linked up with trees and water. Okay. Trees and still water specifically.
And that's just one tree out of, yes.
That's just one tree. So this is also coming through in my art. So what I'm doing is also looking at the spirit of those trees. In a sense, I'm trying to animate them. I'm seeing them much more than just objects to paint, but these are really living things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're moving as well. So I think I'm using paint in a chromatic way. That means often sort of clashing colours, a bit like Gauguin. Gauguin's a great inspiration, one of my many inspirations. But this idea of putting, say, blocks of colour next to each other is that sort of juxtaposition, the clashing, which creates a vibration of frequency on the canvas. And I'm really, really interested in that idea. And
it's amazing that you're able to create this movement and energy representing trees that are very still beings, but have like such a life going on that we can't see unless we look closely like you do and look at what's inside, what's outside, how they move with the wind, how they change with the seasons, with time. And there's all this movement going on that we don't necessarily see on a on a daily basis. And so I love that you're using color to express that.
Yeah, but also when I draw, I mean, the longest drawing I've ever done, I mean, just to tell you, normally I will take, say, 5 hours to make a drawing. I always start by drawing outside. So I'm building a relationship with them, and I'll do sketches, small sketches, which I'll take back into the studio. So the paintings are made in the studio, the big oil paintings. But the drawing, I actually did one drawing that took 10 days. So that was 5 hours every day, going back and revisiting the same tree and being quite disciplined about it. And that was a really profound experience for me, because I felt that I was really sort of building a rapport. And I didn't know how it's going to play out at all, because initially it was just going to start with one sheet of paper, and then that would be the drawing. And somehow I just kept adding, so it ended up being 6 sheets of paper that became one massive drawing. So I was about 2 meters away, and then starting to sort of look up. So you've got this really interesting perspective, and you can obviously see a lot more of the texture because you're only 2 meters away. But you also start to become aware of everything that's around the tree, what is surrounding the tree. So the weather patterns, birds, so all the different sounds, and even the temperature, and the subtle sort of sounds that are made when the wind blows and moves the branches, the creaking, and all of this stuff. It all comes into
So
the
beautiful.
whole experience really of drawing the tree. So, you know, you're drawing the tree, but you're also in a sense capturing time. You're literally capturing each day, and then you're adding that onto the drawing, which I think that's very much what drawing is about. It's about recording time on a single sheet of paper.
Wow. Oh, I love this idea. I love this idea also because that's what trees do, right? They record time.
Yeah,
They
that's
record
exactly.
our memories. They outgrow us, and they are there through generations and generations of people and families. And so in that sense, like I see a parallel there as well between the trees and your drawings. And actually, so you this process it's absolutely beautiful. Like you're in communion with the nature and you're making these drawings, or you're also painting in your studio, and then these become artworks, pieces of art that then end up in someone's home on their wall. What are your thoughts around like the feelings that can sort of that can emanate from your works in a home, and how do you think that's enriches a home? Because that's something I'm really interested in. Like I believe that every home should have the presence of a tree to sort of anchor, ground, roots, you know, the home, and that feeling that you have when you're home of being nurtured and grounded. And so I'm really curious to hear how you feel your paintings, you know, what they emanate when they're actually like in someone's home.
Yeah, I know that they do, because I mean, I switch art in my own home. So, you know, every few weeks I'll bring maybe two, maybe three paintings, and I've got quite big walls, so I can, they look amazing. And, you know, some people might think they're quite large, but in fact, it's amazing. You know, you put them up on the wall and it literally electrifies the whole space. That's how I would describe it. And, you know, if you take them away, you've just got white walls. It's quite sad, really.
I agree.
It's amazing how it completely changes it. So, yeah, I think they're definitely a window into something. They're a window into a different reality, even. And I like to think that the work it's much more than just the subject, because it's got that semi-abstract quality. It means that you can get a lot out of looking at them from a distance, but also up close. You go on yet another type of journey. The meandering marks, I'm quite gestural and expressive, and you know, you can start to see the movement of the paint, and you know, that with that semi-abstract quality, it gives people a lot of access into the work.
Wow, so an electrifying experience for the home. Yeah, that's very powerful, actually, to imagine. There was something else. Well, I haven't seen your works, you know, in person, let's say, in this digital world, and but I hope I will one day. But just from your website, and I really encourage everyone to go to your website. It'll be posted as well in the comments on the side. Yes, it's definitely electrifying the way you capture the movements of the trees. They're not just still, you know, representations. They're really like in movement, dynamic, and so I can definitely feel this electrifying feeling. I had another question for you, which is around, like, I saw the way I found you and I discovered your work was through the Urban Tree Festival that went on last week, of course, but your session from last year, where you actually created an ink from oak, right? And then you use that ink to draw the oak tree that you made the ink from, which is, you know, almost, after you've told me about your earliest memories, really you feel that connection between like that raw nature and that you're using to then represent and you know, beautify with your drawings. Like, can you tell me a bit more about that process, and how did you figure that out, and what brought you to try this? And
well, it just seemed like the next obvious step to me, because I think what that came from was I was doing an art ecology collaboration, okay, and this is the first, if you can call it that, rewilded woodland. I know the ecologists don't always like that term, but it's quite a fashionable term, but it's a woodland that was set aside, believe it got 150 years ago as an experiment to see what would happen if you just leave it to do its own thing without any influence from humans. So it's being fenced off.
So where is that? Sorry, I missed it.
It's called Lady Park Wood.
Okay.
It's in the Forest of Dean. So I was granted access along with some of my fellow artists. So I made work there. Now, one of the big drawings that I made, I sat there again for how long? It took me 5 hours sitting there solidly just drawing, no breaks or anything. And I was drawing with charcoal, and I just felt it needed something else. So I just grabbed, just sort of spontaneously really, I just grabbed some earth from under the trees and I started drawing with that. And I've just really liked what happened. So it's a sort of, it looks like a brown pigment, but it's actually the humus of those trees. So it's as if that woodland is now in that drawing about itself. And that got me thinking about other ways to express trees.
Express trees, I love that.
Yeah. And so obviously I know you can extract a lot of things from trees. So I thought, well, what about making ink? So I was reading up on that and decided to actually have a go and make my own. You can buy some of these inks ready-made, but I think the experience of making it is really amazing. And it's not that difficult. And then of course, you know, you make a drawing from it, which just feels.
You're right. It's really, I love this idea of expressing the trees, like using their voice, their elements, their texture to help them to express themselves through your hand in a way.
Yeah. It's interesting because so this year I was fortunately I was invited back to join the Urban Tree Festival, and I focused on a walnut tree. It's one of my favorite trees at the moment. And so I collected a load of walnuts that were on the ground, and they're covered in the pith. It's only the pith that you use, in fact, it's not the shells or the nuts. And then I kept them for a whole year, well, throughout most of lockdown, actually. So they were sort of starting to rot down a bit, which made it really easy for me to turn into ink. You probably would have seen it, I don't know. On the tree
yes, festival. I did, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's quite a process, but I'll tell you what, it's the most incredible ink. And it definitely feels different from the oak gall ink, interestingly. And, you know, you get these, this sort of, I think you call it touche, don't you? Especially when you're working with lithographic crayons that you're drawing with, you know, you can dissolve them in terps, and then it starts, you get little granules, tiny little particles sort of moving around and creating interesting organic structures. And this is what was happening with the walnut ink. Yeah. And it was just expressing the trees, expressing it perfectly.
That's great. So you're the woman who talks to trees and expresses them, helps them to express themselves. And so Fiona, you have an exhibition going on until the 29th of May in Gloucestershire, right? And you also have a project that's going on with Gibraltar. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about that project?
Absolutely. Well, that's been going on in my head since '93, when I came back finally from Sweden via Spain. So I went out to Spain, namely Barcelona, to do a master's. And so it felt like a long journey, really. And I'd spent a lot of time in Iceland, I should say. So all of that, plus, you know, Scotland. So I came back and needed to process it. That's what happened, really. And also my English was terrible. Sounds strange, but I've been speaking in Swedish the whole time.
I understand that, yeah. You start to lose you don't know what language you're speaking, what accent.
So instead of painting it, obviously I needed to find a way to get back into the language, so I decided to start writing it. And then that developed into a series of, well, it was a poem in several verses about each place. And then as the years went by, because they they were just there, and I kept thinking about it, and it just made sense really to do something more and to turn it into art. So they became a springboard for this project, which is now called Our Sacred Earth. I was a part of an exhibition that's just come down in Gibraltar in the main museum, which is called Gustavo Bacaris's Gallery on Casemate Square in Gibraltar. And I went out with two curators, so it sounds very bizarre, but we were invited out there after 3 attempts at trying to go out there because of lockdown. And myself and the founder of the Arborealists, Tim Craven, we were both invited to give talks. While we were there, we were also put in front of the cultural minister, who wanted us to present a couple of new cross-cultural ideas for further collaboration. And one of those was my Sacred Earth project. And they really love it. So they've taken it on.
Wonderful.
So we're going to be involving them, that's their artists, and also artists from the UK. And it will be exhibitions over here and then back to Gibraltar to exhibit in the museum.
It's wonderful, the life and journey of a project, isn't it? Like from, was it 1993? Is it that you said? And
started in 1993. And, you know, I think it's all about timing again. And I think the timing was never quite right. And I really believe in having sort of goals in a way. I always set goals for myself, but also I plant a lot of seeds. They come back to trees again, but I'm always constantly planting seeds. And this was a seed that needed a lot longer time to germinate. So it's only now. And I think it's very appropriate with what's going on globally, and, you know, mass extinction of species and deforestation, etc., etc. It really, really feels like the right time now.
And a regained awareness as well in our natural environments. And that's something, you know, that it seems to me like it's been a big shift in the last year, where suddenly we are a lot more aware of the trees, the trees around us, just the trees we walk by in the streets. We've been looking at them on our everyday walks. And so I think this renewed connection to nature and you know, sort of noticing it a lot more, appreciating it for what it brings us, is also like a big, something that's resurfacing and giving that new energy to everything related to trees and nature. And, you know, I'm very excited for your projects. It's they're very beautiful works, and this project in Gibraltar. Well, who knows, maybe I'll go to Gibraltar one day as well, but higher chances I make it to Gloucestershire than Gibraltar. Fiona, thank you so much for sharing all this. I do have maybe 2 last questions, which are very short ones, but you already mentioned briefly an answer to my first one, which is, what is your favorite tree at the moment?
My favorite tree at the moment, well, I have to say it is at the moment still the walnut tree.
Walnut tree.
I feel a lot of love towards it. Something about it. But there are so many trees that I feel like that about.
Great.
There's a cherry blossom tree near my studio that I really like a lot. And
Wonderful.
again, quite unassuming, but just there's something beautiful about it.
Yeah. And
awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And my other question is, what, you know, if you were to speak to one person that you admire and that inspires you, who would that be?
Well, I think it would have to be Sir David Attenborough.
I'm asking because I'm wondering, like, you know, who else, you know, in the future I can invite to my nature connections. And I think Sir David Attenborough is a very great challenge. And if I can manage to speak with him, I'll definitely be a success, and I'll be asking you for questions as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fiona. It was really great hearing all about your experience with nature, your memories, and your relationship to trees, and the way you create your beautiful artwork. Really, again, encourage everyone to look at your website and be electrified by your work. Thanks so much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. Bye, Fiona.